So we are live. If you're on the Pacific coast as I am, or anywhere near there in the Pacific timeline, it is a 7:11. Just sipping on coffee and about to do what I call pace. It's pace tempo training, basically. The reason I just call it pace training is because it's the training wheels where you're just basically starting out what you can do. Like, it's the length of this room. But it's also the Monterey Peninsula. It is beautiful outside. But I just don't enjoy going out there. I do lives, and I have done lives. I think one on this channel where I get out there and go for these ultra long walks. So today it's probably going to be the minimum that I usually do. The very minimum is 5 miles, but then I'll do 8. What am I doing? It's called gradual intensity training. It's the only thing that I could do where I could effectively increase the intensity slightly of workouts I was doing. So what am I doing? It's like long duration training. You know, I could sit on the couch and get essentially nowhere. Even when you think you're not getting anywhere, nutrition is a very powerful tool. During my lives and on my channels and on my blogs, I always, put down my experience, which really has nothing to do with my interests, but then it's interesting how things have merged and come, through this, I'm not going to call it a circular process because that's all part of the ontological discoveries that I've made and it's not even necessarily spherical, but when we get into spherical, if you want to get technical, it's non-Euclidean spherical mathematics, parabola, when you start to see how thermodynamics, when you start to see how kind of postulations about Zoroastrianism proposed fourth law. It's like when you have two bodies in equilibrium, there will be a third, basically, in a very rudimentary way. Where does the entropy go? And so that leads into all sorts of areas. Like when you just put that sort of... So I got my coffee there. Not the best thing to start out in the morning. You can literally cause yourself a heart attack, and people younger and younger are starting to succumb to ischemic reactions, cardiac arrest. It's not just a lack of sodium and potassium, sodium-potassium pump and saltatory conduction and all that. I talk about physiology, kinesiology, anatomy, but then my interests, for those of you who know a little bit of my background, I was a very high-level trainer for a time. After some really weird experiences, I could no longer justify or follow at that point, at that time, a more corporeal or temporal type of pursuit. I became corrupt in myself, but I kind of realized my own physical corruption, and it led me toward researching, writing books that I published and then unpublished, because we go through different things in our lives, But it's all about a soul journey, and that may seem like something that could just be dismissively discussed and left. So what are we doing right now? It's yesterday I did, I think, 8.5 miles. So what I'll do is I'll do about an hour, sometimes 2 hours of just pace walking. This seems absolutely insane, but I'm able to Stay on flat surface, regulate and ruminate, which I'm doing. And when I look down at the meter there on these Apple phones, it's great because it keeps track of your mileage down to the step. I do have a watch, but I'm not using it currently. And so I'm doing what I call continuous training. And it's part of my GET training, gradual intensity training method. And it's the only way that I could kind of establish a rudimentary, like when you do know a lot about fitness and you, or at least you think you know a lot for yourself, right? And how to remedy the situation at the time in your life. When you get older and you become physically someone else, it doesn't matter how much you know, getting off that ass becomes like the main predicate. It becomes the main target. And the more divisive a person is, the more excuses they can use. So here, I can stop, I can sip on coffee, sip on water, take my protein powder. I just found that it makes a lot more sense. I'm not really like a treadmill person, but very soon I will be hitting the gym because this has allowed me to get in shape. And I do encourage people to, especially after COVID and the negativity, there's like this negative halo that hangs over everyone now, right? Where I think it really got to people who are more existentially or more extroverted, right? I wouldn't call myself an introvert. In fact, what I am is a really weird personality temperament, is an INTJ. I'm an extroverted thinker. I'm an introvert, considered an introvert that's an extroverted thinker. But I really am not an introvert at all. I kind of look at the situation and I don't know, I'm not going to get too deep into that because to me that's more ontological. It's like, to me that's more of the study of metaphysics. And everything really does tie in together. And that's why I'm kind of doing these experimental lives, because the more that this is the third live that I've done. One, I got up at like 3:30 or 4 in the morning, went on like a 12-mile walk. I'm in Seaside, California right now, and I walk through a few towns, through Monterey, New Monterey, and then on to Pacific Grove. Beautiful coastline. If you are not familiar with that area, definitely look it up and see some pictures. But there's more there's more inviting places. Let's just say San Francisco's gorgeous. Worked and drove around that area. Trained around that area. Did food deliveries around that area. But this is allowing me to be able to guide and guise my workouts in a way where they're extremely regimented. I do well through segments, and I tend to think a lot. And in gyms, people didn't really know where I was coming from, especially when I was a gym rat, where I would be there all day. And that's exactly where I'm going with this. Is I don't have a gym right now, so like wherever I am, that is the place where I'm doing the physicality of my exercise. So what I do is I've got my bands set up. I'm going to be setting them up on the top of that door sill right there. And I just try to ease in the morning, even though it doesn't really seem like I'm doing much and I'm just running my mouth. I've probably walked close to half a mile, maybe even a mile during my time. And I find that being more subtle in the way that we approach exercise, less abrasive, less violent or ballistic, if you will, and more like this is called, apropos, it's continuous training. And what I found back in the day when I stayed very lean and muscular, which ended up getting to me because I suddenly had all these clients, all this respect, really understood, at least at that time, the exercise science behind what I was doing. And there was a complacency of I got there. Like, I'm driving the Mercedes, living in the, Avalon Towers up in Mountain View. Yet I was just like empty. It was like, what do I do? Where how we set our goals and what the end all goal is has to be true to something that's very, that's more than intrinsic in the temporal or the corporeal aspects. So about 10 years ago, with that sort of void in you, not only can other people pick up on that and see that, but it's a universal, it's like you're naked before the cosmos, like in the most awesome, a metanoia is this term. And I love to follow people like Nathaniel Gillis, Robert Bigelow, but then I'm also very much a fan of like Michael Segru, who's a philosophy professor, because philosophy brought me to this precipice where it's like, now you could either see your life as a nightmare or this amazing, like you're standing up, at the apex, at the event horizon of something that's so great and something that's so mystical. When we get into mysticism, that's where I'm a big adherent, and don't get me wrong on this, but Friedrich Nietzsche. To me, I started reading him. I think if you're an intellectual bonehead, a musclehead, and you read Nietzsche, you won't realize how you're opening the floodgates to exactly what I'm talking about, where there's like this. So again, that term metanoia, it's like this huge turn of events where something happens, there's a spiritual impetus, and you are thrown into this, you're given more information than your little human brain can possibly process. And so it gets back into this, like when I start to trail off and I feel a little bit overwhelmed about tackling a certain intellectual idea, concept, pursuit, and I'd like to convey everything that I possibly have been studying and condense it, I look down at my own 2 feet and I realize I'm exercising. There's a reason why exercising out demons is not only a term that was used in more of a Christian faith, and we're not going to get into that, at least not in a very roundabout way, but I would encourage people to look up somebody named Ralph Alice, who's done extensive research on taking the mysticism out and looking at things in a very factual way is extremely important, okay? So here again, I can stop, I can sip. I don't even know what I'm doing on here, but I feel led to do this, and it doesn't really make a difference who's signing in, who's not. I did a couple of experimental lives. Didn't know if they actually, like the last one I did on my, I'm going to say annex channel to this, but it's really a tritiary channel. It's a channel where I just kind of like put things that I'm not real sure about, Stellar Mass 13. And so I did a couple experimental lives, and then I rewatched and I'm like, yeah, this is helping me ruminate. And I'm also expressing myself at the same time. And so it gets into these core principles that is what Esoteric Principles of Light is based on. So in a very roundabout way, I started a blog after going through these very strange spiritual experiences in 2013, right around my son's birthday. Strangely, it was the time where I was again birthed. It's like there's this birth that happens from a I don't know. I would even consider it like I think that to get to this point, you have to go like we're talking about epistemological or secular, non-secular concepts, right? Where you're really removing religion, but can you ever? Like when you get back down to this, what I'm doing, I'm exercising, I'm moving, I'm metabolizing. But there's something much more taking place here where I am in a physical body. I'm able to do this at this time. I'm able to aspirate. I'm able to expel waste at will. I even have the bathroom right there, but we're talking about breath, right? We're talking about the inhalation of oxygen. And then what I do get into on my walks is like I'll do these transverse draw-ins for periods of time. I'll do like reverse walking. I'll do side-to-side shuffles. I'll jog, I'll run. There's a welcome to... And sorry for all the ums. I'm still waking up. As soon as my son takes off, I'm trying to get into the habit of doing this and then formalizing something where there's a little bit more obvious organization, where I'm even, open to talking about certain subjects and getting a couple hundred more, maybe subs, I don't know, so that I'm able to be gratified in some of the offerings that YouTube puts forth in being able to offer communications where I can like look down with ease at the people that might be watching and want to discuss something in specific, because there's a lot to talk about, experiences that I've had that permeate far beyond the discussion of a carnal or a corporeal mechanism, a physical mechanism, into a more metaphysical or liminal aspect of living and being, which I find extremely fascinating when I see the Sean Ryan show. Was it Bet David? Just watched a little thing with him where he's supposedly like talking about who really runs the world. I remember watching Jordan Maxwell, aka Jordan Maxwell, Russell Pine, passed away last year. So people like this, it's like he was refuted and called, a POS, supposedly, revealed to the world with certain people who wanted to see him as a fraud. And with somebody like that, it's so easy to dismiss them, and he ended up passing away with nothing in his pocket. And the reason I bring him up is because it's really about the fraud in all of us. If you are trying to bring information forth and trying to express a certain freedom, so Michael Segru, he talks about Socrates discussing whether or not liberation or autonomy with Gorgas is true freedom. And so really what we are always discussing is the free will, right? Is whether or not will is like right now, am I exercising free will? Yes. Once that free will permeates beyond just me, and I walk out there and I start to affect other people, and you think, how could you affect other people when you're still in your space? You got your headphones on, you got your hat on, you basically have this sign saying, I'm doing something, I'm in operation, but the shop isn't open. And when people venture out into, again, the carnal aspects of economy, commerce, and wanting to do trade, they walk out the door with their usually chagrined smile, right? Gets into transcendentalism a little bit, Thoreau, Emerson. Amazing. Those were very transformative pieces of literature for me. At first, what I recommend is, if a lot of these publications, like I held the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky, I held that book in my hand, and after reading Crime and Punishment and having it impact me in such a profound way, some 13 plus years ago, the Brothers Karamazov, I didn't understand where that was coming from. And then as I was kind of looking into that, Michael Segru he lays out, I mean, with all of his tenure and understanding, watching his earlier videos, when I think it was like in the early 90s, late 80s, one of the last ones that I watched with him, where he was doing a discourse on specific people with, philosophy, political philosophy, things like that. Well, Foucault, I never pronounced that right, but French, big adherent to Nietzsche, but somebody who, like, even Michael called him, like, in a very dismissive way, like the son of Nietzsche, sort of like how he saw himself, right? Michel Foucault. And how this idea of personal power that Nietzsche talks about, this will to power, this absoluteness in masculine energy, which is being embraced by females these days as well. And that gets into a whole other area of the study of virtue. What is that? The study of ethics. And then once you realize that those things are just superficial and they don't mean anything without the resonance of principle and how important purity is, right? So that was my key takeaway, my walk away, was the fact that you're searching this internal dialogue narrative is, you're searching for the principles that will guide you and make you feel like what you're doing has substance. That gets into a whole other area, right? Matter. I mean, the whole concept of matter and substance falls apart from a quantum molecular field stage. The areas of, no, what are you about? What comprises you? What are you made of? Why is it important that you're able to express yourself? What do you have to say? If you can't add to the economic, which is always in frailty, system, through the sociological means, and attach yourself to this mechanism, then what is the point to your existence, right? So we get into the areas that are discussed with Socrates, Gorgias, and the analytical aspects of why do you need to be liberated, and what does this liberation bring you? So I highly suggest you go onto Michael's channel and check out some of the things that he has to talk about, because it brings, with all of his learned professional, I'm not going to say knowledge, because it's way beyond knowledge. Like he's a seeker, like we all are. He's looking for answers. And I think when you're no longer looking for absolutes, when you see that there's this fluidity you can see it as a frailty in the beginning. And what really metaphysics and ontological studies get into, it's how do I work with this without becoming rigid myself? And so, like, when I start to feel like I'm trailing off, I come back to the dialogue of exactly what I'm doing. I think it's really easy. I think that really is the misunderstanding and misappropriation of rumination, where, like, to me, rumination is a good thing. It's like if you're ruminating while you're moving, then that becomes an actionable deed. That becomes, you become a conduit, right? So you're serving a greater good when you begin to understand these, that there are not levels of purity or purification going back to your origin. Like Jesus said, going back into your roots, if you ever want to look up what the profound teachings, that's what really got me into this state of mind where I understood what was being talked about. Like the scriptures seem so cryptic, right? But when you look at the Hammadi, particularly the Gospel of Truth, I'd say starting out with the Gospel of John, more Gnostic texts, the Gospel of James, and then getting into the Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Judas Iscariot, which is very obscure writing and was sold in the antiquities, the illegal black market, and then put into a safe, the Gospel of Judas Iscariot, and rotted in a safe for something like 20 or 30 years. And what was left, unfortunately, was pretty mind-blowing, because Jesus, you can get into King Isis, which there was a documented actual king, Isis, who married Mary, who was a very wealthy person. I'm not going to get into iterating and trying to oversimplify Ralph Ellis' work, but if you want to go on his channel and check that out, I highly recommend that too. No, I don't feel like one author or one source, and I think that's the beauty of it, is ever good enough. I think it's a compilation of like the matriculation. Like, even if you are in a room like this and you're ruminating and you're thinking under the guise of philosophy, you are matriculating. You that energy goes somewhere. I saw a post when I was waking up, because I have a bunch of stuff for sale on Facebook Marketplace. And this guy who's running a really successful channel, but it's more like outdoors type of stuff, very useful things, how to tie knots and so forth, right? He posts this discrepancy that he has just with social media, where he's finding all these channels that aren't only just ripping off his information, right? And so that gets into the areas that we're talking about, is like, even the information that you think is something that you came to, it's new for you, is unlocking an action potential in the pervading world, and that no matter if you do a video on it or not, you're going to see this like 100 monkey phenomenon take place, where the idea, it unlocks, it's like a mimetic sequence when you get into so oddly, I learned about that through the study of steroidogenesis. I was a very natural person in fitness for the first 40 years of my life. At about 41 years old, I started to think, I want to know more about what's going on, as far as this physiology of of what's going on in the human specter with the physical aspects of the endocrine system, what makes us tick, what makes us who we are, what defines the male female, and how deeply does that go into from an ontological perspective, where is that line drawn between your mind and the world outside that's kind of this shared mind. And so there's a left-hand path that you can go to where it's like you have the hive mind, right? You have this Marxist sort of sociological, and I'm not saying good or bad, I'm saying this is a construct. And then on the other side, there's always this dichotomy. We'd love to get away from this dualism, but the only way to get away from that dualism is to embrace a concept that has been postulated and brought forth. And this is the whole thing, this is the whole discussion with Ralph Ellis, where it's a mind-blowing discovery that he's made, a rediscovery, where it is the fact that Jesus is considered a Mason and called a Mason. That was the term that was used, and even to the Masonic rites, they are talking about the production, like Hiram Abiff, they're talking about the production of the Great Pyramid, assuming Giza, right? The perfection that he put into the construction of, with the joint systems, right? Where he had this geometric understanding that he gained an expertise in, and that's why that's the whole process of the Masonic rites, is, with the tow rope and everything, where he was he was murdered for his ability to perfect, but he wasn't physically untouchable, but the ability to do that lived on through geometry. And so it really gets into the aspects of building. And so you can't remove sociology, you can't remove communism, because when you look at it in a very analytical way from a total rational standpoint, you see that we are either building blocks toward this higher mind. When you discuss matriculation, when you see that there are schools of thought, and you clarify that to yourself, like, I need to be someone in society. Some people say I need to be a pillar. Some people just see themselves in a family. You're raised with 10, 12 other kids in your family. You kind of know where you fall as far as all these personalities and what people expect. But for me, I'm looking at it in a way, very purposaciously, at the fact that it becomes, so things like reincarnation become undeniable, then postulations like re-embodiment then become extremely plausible. And then you have people like Robert Bigelow, Nathaniel Gillis, and then the researchers like Steve Mira, Barry Fitzgerald, that I've discussed prior to, unearthing and displaying the decades long, and they're trying to go back even further, conclusive evidence that not only is something else going on here from a metaphysical sense, when they begin to study without any sort of bias, like, what is it? What's going on with this UFO phenomenology? What's going on with these concepts of reincarnation? What are these entities that are visiting people, sometimes in a very aggressive and strange way, back in Nathaniel Gillis's work, where there's a preoccupation with principles. There's a preoccupation with calling people out. There's a preoccupation not with, like, you'd love to think that in the name of Jesus, all demons go away. Right? Or, when you're getting into the Insidious series, the Annabelle, those movies are awesome. I heard The Red Door sucks, but I still want to watch it. But they get into areas where, in philosophy, they they referred to this whole thing as the Geist, right? So you kind of look at this Hegelian dialectic, and it really, like the zeitgeist, back to Jordan Maxwell, like it gets into these ghosts, but this phenomenology of ghosts of the past, why we do certain things, why we have these, the need to, or really, if you looked at it like a pyramid, the need to express ourselves at a particular step of the process. If you want a construct, it would be like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It was interesting how Maslow started to add in this more metaphysical aspect to the human psyche, right? To where the expression of the psyche became more paramount. Like, yes, there's all these things that we need in order to sustain our physical being, our lives, and there's this step process. But then when you get into the metaphysical, it's kind of like, how important is all that? Couldn't you just take one big grand step? Like, it becomes a rate limiting factor of, okay, I'm going to work within the physiological realms, or really boundaries, right? So that's why I love to get into the areas of our own physiology. Like, is this a prison? Is this the only time that our souls, and getting into soul, you have to look into the Gnostic aspects of that as well. Because when you go back really far, you start to see how this concept of oversoul becomes, then it gets into Jung, Jung. Carl is like, I mean, he was really tying this stuff, kind of like Gottlob Frege, like he was really trying to look at this area where mathematics and philosophy merge. And I always like to make the point is like, I'm doing it right now. I'm exercising, I'm moving. That is mathematics and philosophy. It's like, no, I'm not thinking about the cardiac muscle, but as I'm innervating and going through the process of pulsatory conduction, of actuating my skeletal muscle, moving my structure through my nervous system, and the prompts that come forth from that, one has to ask why. Like, there's this rate propagation signal. Yeah, you have the acetylcholine, you have, Huxley's sliding filament theory, you have the mitochondria at work, you have, the lives of the cell, the great contributions with Watson and Crick, DNA, if you ever read that one, that's an amazing book. Really, I would say archaic compared to what we now know, but it laid out the human genome. There were a lot of errors, yes, but it's very interesting. Again, you get into homunculus and the whole process that's behind that, right? Darwinian theory of evolution, but more so how we've been conditioned and what we'll accept. But then our souls, we could say this intrinsic metaphysical energy, there's a term used of prima materia, materia prima. It's like this pre-substance of matter that wasn't really solidified in this whole carbon aspect of, this corporeal, carnal aspect of this finite human body existing in a temporal sort of way, but having this profound and deep understanding that I have lived before. And it gets into areas of amnesia, where somebody postulated the term amniotic fluid, and I found that really interesting because it's like we come out of the birth canal forgetting, not remembering, but it's like something we knew, something that we have this pre-inclination. Some of us are blocked from our spiritual lineage. Some of us fully know that we're put into families that we have nothing in common with. Other people feel like they've been with family members forever. And so it really gets into this ontological study, which we may never really find out. Or maybe when we do find out, that's what that 26,000 year or 13,000 year half cycle, like the Younger Dryas period, that Randall Carlson looks into, who's a Mason, and he ties a lot of the geometrical constants through a numeric sort of code. And you do see implications, like there's a lot of refuting going on with Einstein's string theory, and especially people who are, was that Sir Robert Primrose, but I was just looking something like that up and watching something on that where it's kind of like everyone is trying to refute these more esoteric type concepts that don't really tie into physics of Einstein's, and trying to kind of say that Einstein was kind of more of a spiritualist on this. Like, where do you get this from? And when you start to see that there's these ontological ties that are irrefutable in a sort of vortex math where the numbers do tie in, like we're discussing like torsion field energy, meridian lines, like within our bodies, around the earth. The whole thing that's been postulated and talked about for so long. Crow 777 does a really good investigation on that, as far as like the 90 degrees of sorrow that he talks about in the room, like that we are placed in these domicides, if we choose, that aren't good representations of our etheric bodies, where there's no real room to you could almost call it swirl on energy or spin energy, but that our souls understand this, but everything, all the boundaries in society are put in place to either allow us to do this great work, the great work, to free ourselves. Like, do we have that ability? Or are we bound by a concept or an idea? Or have we been lazy in a sense of, throughout lifetimes, always needing to be existentially governed, needing to have an excuse that, no, that's why I'm not evolving, that's why I'm not embracing my own personal power, is that I won't acknowledge that I have within me this Socratean rudimentary base of, I must go through the process of expression. And invariably, this gets back into the tier system that Esoteric Principles of Light is all about, is if there's not purity at the center of any protocol, any I'm gonna use the term system and go against Nietzsche's hatred of the system, but he's using a system in a sense, definitely. The will to power, there's like a step process, but it's kind of like, how can you call it a system when that is the only system kind of thing? Like, you can't. So I think what Nietzsche was talking about is that systemizers, people who try to like invent the wheel, or it's even beyond the Brahmic wheel. It's basically saying you choose the wheel, you choose this life rebirth cycle, because you're afraid of yourself. Like, you're afraid of your own power. I would hate to like quote Mariam Williamson, but she did say something like that, and I did make a video of that years ago, where in essence, to paraphrase, it's like we are afraid of our own power. We don't. Once there's been exposed to certain corruptibility, even we stand back aghast at the fact that, and Nietzsche talks about this, like, I could not have done that, but I did do that, and then like, you can stay stuck ruminating in this type of postulation where you just can't believe you went through a certain action. But this gets into a sort of scapegoatism, that we are used as scapegoats, but we use that energy that is a complete and total passing the buck. It's like we can blame other people for every ailment, everything negative that's ever happened to us. And so when I'm searching for this, the answers come to me. Like, when you really want to know, it's not just like an AI algorithm, but maybe it is. maybe the transparency that we're pretty much forced under, where we have to sign these. We're essentially signing an NDA every time we have to do an update on Facebook or with Apple. We're disclosing our information, and we're saying, yeah, go for it. But my point is, what is this information being used for? Some people like to stop at the fact that, yeah, there's alien overlords. There's the 13 families that have run everything, since the beginning of time. It's Lucifer, it's Satan. And more so, what's being discovered and solidified is that there's an extremely mechanical process. When Nathaniel Gillis has done his research, that he's been blown away, because he had a really refreshing view on this that has been, like, he's not afraid to evolve. That's why I love watching his videos, and I wish that he would do more. Not more interviews. The guy's got, if you ever go up on his channel, he's got like 102 interviews up there right now, and he tries to do as many as he can. But with that, he's not able to or funded to go into the research that, and getting into this matriculation aspect, is someone like that, and Robert Bigelow and other people who have information, but they can't share that information, especially Robert Bigelow. Yeah, this is my live. I'm traveling around a lot. If you watch this a couple times, you'll get a lot out of it, but you'll have to do diligence and do your own research. And then the conversation will make a lot more sense to you. But there are some things that are talked about that you might want to look up, like the Sean Ryan show, and look at episode 66. It's a 3-parter. I'm not a ufologist. I'm not into the UAP thing. I've seen black orbs in the sky for like 20, 30 minutes, maybe even longer. back in 1991 with a friend of mine that was a marine biologist. So he had this scientific mind. He was watching it with me and I was asking him, do you see this? He wasn't as blown away as I was because I don't know why, but you know, it was like this, what the hell is that? And then as I was looking, I could see something that I thought was even a seam. And it was just miles away from here. It was a December, a very clear, crisp winter night. There weren't a lot of lights around to disturb what I was viewing, and it was an entire clear horizon. Couldn't tell how far away it was. And it was so bizarre. So it was similar to the experience that is being discussed by these three gentlemen on the Sean Ryan show, episode 66. I think probably Eric, I think it was Eric Hecker, impressed me the most, but the other two guys on there it was very equal. It was like people's lives are being destroyed and turned upside down over this information. It looks like it's UAPs, UFOs, but Nathaniel Gillis makes the point, it transitions and changes based on us and how we see it. And not only from a personal sense, but mostly from a societal, structural sense where the saucers didn't come around until that was a postulation that was discussed, written about, and then suddenly it became this sort of collective mind influence that was accepted, right? That UFOs, or we're going to look out for UFOs, and then suddenly to certain people, UFOs appear. So on one side, you have David Paulides, who's got extensive research on people who disappear. The reason I'm bringing this up with Sean Ryan is because Sean actually brought it up on his show and said, oh my God. Like in this one instance, this person was asked what was being transported in this ship, a supposed UFO, UAP, a technology that isn't very familiar. This gentleman talked about seeing a smartphone, much like the one I'm holding right now and recording on back in 2009, when flip phones were the thing, Blackberries were the thing, you know, and that the NSA and, you know, Bitcoin and all this technology that has been produced through these government wings, and why they're being produced, and why sociology, economy, and all of these constructs are such a rigid control mechanism. But getting back to my point was that what was discussed on the Sean Ryan show was the fact that these were bodies, they were human bodies. There was a trafficking operation going on. And you scratch your head and you're like, a bunch of worthless people? Like, you know, we just kill each other at will. We just disrespect one another at will. We don't see one another as being jack shit. Yet there's this presupposition in metaphysics of how powerful and valuable the soul is. Particularly when we don't know how valuable we are, when we have this amnesia. And so that implication ties directly in with Robert Bigelow's assertions that he says this conclusively after spending millions upon millions of dollars. Really, he lost not only his wife and his grandson, but other people in his life. The man's been through it, and there's only so much that he can talk about and discuss. But with Jeffrey Mishlove on New Thinking, we did 4 interviews in this past year, very recently, he discusses the fact that, like he says this point blank, out of all of the remote viewers that he's worked with, owning Skinwalker Ranch, for him to say this is a huge area where it should just broaden your mind and blow you away and get you thinking about this very seriously. And that's why I'm really doing this live. It's not because I'm trying to get a bunch of people watching, but I want to document what I'm discussing here. I want to show where I'm at in this process. And you'd think I'd be sitting here wanting to use more of my faculties, but I really do feel like I've got to move, I've got to get exercise, I've got to respirate, I've got to get this out in a sense of while I'm in movement. And I think that that's a critical factor and what's very important. So that's what I'm practicing now, is trying to employ not only a more intellectual and ontological mind in movement. Just taking a little break because I've been walking for over an hour or so. I'll either take breaks or I'll hit the exercise bands. I'm going to hit the exercise bands a little bit later. I'm going to be doing like full body workout, just trying to hit different areas of my chest, my back, my shoulders, and my arms. And for right now, I'm trying to leave my legs a little bit fresher so that I can do my long mileage walks for right now. But I'm a big advocate of squats. Love doing heavy squats, love doing, Bulgarian lunges, squats, love doing walking squats and lunges and jump squats and everything, everything exercise. And it's really nice to be lighter and to be more appropriated back to that phi, or, as it's been termed, the Adonis index, the Michelangelo index that I talk about, where you take your wrist circumference, 6.5 times your wrist circumference, and then that gives you your chest in inches, right? And then you're able to go through a calculation and calculate where you should be as far as all, like your biceps, your waist, your hips. All these averages should average out to where you get this Fibonacci or phi sequence. And I've had that, and it's painful to know when you really have a lot of tweaking to do, but it also tells you specific things, like when I used to train people, which I'm trying to get back into that. So this is part of what I'm doing, is I'm getting into the actionable aspects of the mind, to where I'm able to do a live, I'm able to talk, I'm able to move, and I'm able to articulate my thoughts. But I also kind of want to purge and get out a lot of the things that are on my mind, because I've been studying this stuff for over a decade now, around a decade. It was back in 2013, so it's been, it's going on 11 years that I had this very strange experience that got my mind, bent my mind. It wasn't just one experience, it was several. Went through this metanoia, this big transformative, a cataclysm in a person's life, or depending on it, it's like some people will experience this with the birth of their child, or a car accident, or winning the lottery, or, in whatever way that kind of uncorks this dam, if you will, of, we'll call it spiritual energy. And so that's really what this, gets into, is like Robert Bigelow. What is that clear definition between the physical, of what we assume as physical, which isn't, there's nothing solid there, It's like, we know that. The technology that was talked about on the Sean Ryan show is a vibrational energy, where there was this black toolbox that was placed on top of these structures. One was a boulder, a heavy boulder. One's sitting there on the ground. One's actually levitating several inches off the ground, that has this black box on it. And you start to think about the sheer aspect of vibration and vibrational energy, and how we have that, like that we have the ability to not only utilize the principal energies, if you want to get into Tesla and 369 and all that, or vortex math, these vortices, primer field technology, if you've ever looked that up, and how the pyramids of Giza, everything that you can possibly look at with these mathematical constants and constructs that tie back into, oh, this is how not just the universe, but our world around us has been constructed, and this is how we interplay with it. And so we start to look at ourselves like, why are there 5 digits here? Why do these Rosicrucian and Masonic renderings, artwork, tie back into this dualism? But then you see that when you're able to really look at it, you're seeing the non-duality of the Masonic created religion, which is this simple Judaism. Gets a little bit back into Ralph Ellis's work, and to see that we are to see ourselves at the precipice, at the cross. Like, it was extremely important to see ourselves, and then to see this dichotomy, the tree of life, the tree of knowledge, like which side will you choose, and then ultimately that you can't really choose, like to choose one side. Now you're thrown back through the rabbit hole, thrown back out here in another lifetime, and you're having to learn why the other process might have been important to pick. And it's like, okay, am I supposed to go through the spiritualist life? Am I supposed to choose all this rational thinking and mathematics? Am I supposed to get entrenched with philosophy? Like, where is their freedom, right? And so it gets into that area of Michael Sugrue, where he's going through the Socratean dialogue with Gorgas. And it's like, liberation isn't enough because we'll just lead to corruption every single time. And then you look at Lady Liberty holding that, and you see what's going on today with people who think that they can express this personal power in democratic society when they have no power at all. There's no physical power there. There's no intellectual power. That's the only thing I've really heard Steven Seagal say that makes one hell of a lot of sense. And he's like, Americans run their mouth. Like, they're basically calling out a jihad when they go into 7-Eleven and they're just pissed off at the fact that somebody's standing too close to them. And it's like, you watch this over and over again. These people will go get their guns out of their car, and every reactive experience that they have in their lives is like complete and total chaos. So you go back to like our forefathers and all the esoteric renderings of what the U.S. is really all about, what we're doing here, how it ties into not only the experiment of simple Judaism, of Christianity, what it means to us personally to see ourselves as one of these main characters. Like, a lot of people that can't identify with the selflessness that's postulated with Jesus, who was most likely King Isis, who was an actual king. I just think it's really, really important for people to do diligence and do their own research and try to understand from a more perspicacious view of, meaning a more thought-provoking but specific to themselves informational basis, an archive, a data system, if you will, of compiling what this construct means to them and their own soul development through expression. Because ultimately, freedom leads to expression. And expression leads to two things. It's either, it's probably a revolt, no matter what, but it leads to an alliance. So it comes down to, and this ties back into my weird experience where I discovered this, is that there is an alliance going on. It is between these factions that could be called the druids, the witches, the gods, and men. And so you get into this area where you have to then describe in detail for yourself what these terms mean. Nathaniel Gillis gets into this area where the gods are these disincarnate people, where it becomes there's a heavy influence that a soul has. Robert Bigelow's, where there's like this reference to the disincarnate, that now you become a god, like that the term actual, this term as gods, is that you're no longer in a physical body, you're no longer bound, and whatever you are and whatever you had to learn in this carnal prison, if you will, or an avatar, whatever you were picking up on, you're taking that with you into this more liminal state or metaphysical state of existence where you are now free. What are you going to do with that freedom? So it gets back into the Gorgias dialogue with Socrates, the difference between liberation and autonomy, where to be truly liberated isn't liberation in the sense of being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, to whomever you want, because now you've just given up your freedom in a millisecond. Wish I knew that coming into this, but now I do know that. And so there's this play, this pathos, rhetoric, and play. This we're constantly being swayed. You know, when you get into the Greco-Roman teachings of this, of how we approach a certain subject, what subjects are worthy of approach or reproach. And this gets into Robert Bigelow's work, where if we're trying to define what witches, druids, gods, and men are as a basic construct, we then have to look at the fact that what he says very clearly and states, and this again should blow people's minds, is that we take everything with us. That everything that we do, everything that we are, it doesn't die. We don't forget. Like he gets into the detail of, we don't forget anything. We remember it all. We take everything with us, every thought, every memory, every experience. And he's like allowing people to kind of digest this, because the implications are huge. You think about that. Whatever you're doing now, from a thermodynamic sense, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Whatever mimetic sequence you are to the greater whole, whatever you do and whatever you represent doesn't die. For people my age who are in their 50s, you can very well agree, right? We can agree on the fact that we thought life sucks, then you die. That was imprinted on people in the 80s. There was also a lot of pornography, cigarette machines. You know, it was like late 1970s, early 1980s, where it was a different freaking world. Now the paradigm's completely shifted. And I know guys my age are looking out there going, what the fuck is going on here? Like, how can the world be postulated, put forth in this structuralized, solid sort of way with all these presuppositions and ardently, violently taught to you, where you would get your ass beat And to go complain about it meant you were a PUSS. Why? Because real men don't cry. And now it's like, switch around, got your Alex Jones frogs. You come out the other side and it's like, is this, like, you scratch your head and you're like, I saw it happening. But if I went to sleep for 20 years and I was in some sort of coma and I came out into this world, I would be like, what parallel universe did I get shit out in? So we talked about that. We talked about the Sean Ryan show. Heavily recommending that you look into episode 66, among others. Looking into Jeffrey Mishlove, Robert Bigelow, the 4 interviews that he's done. Looking into Nathaniel Gillis, looking at his playlist on his channel. He has a book called The Skin That Crawls. And another one that I have to mention that I rarely do is Leak Project, Rex Bear. I've been watching him on and off for many, many years. Have to give a shout out to Soraya on Where Did the Road Go also for having some very interesting guests that have impacted me a great deal. And allowed me to piece some things together. And I guess the biggest statement after doing all this research, all this personal research, writing as I'm doing it, creating a blog, putting my thoughts and ideas down with the construct that was available at the time, which is always growing. Do we ever get past that? But to be able to kind of have other people go through this dialogue that is going on in your mind, in your soul, in your body, in your need, your will to become, and to see these people that represent this very clearly, that lived at a time that impacted a lot of people, like Friedrich Nietzsche, and to see people who clearly define this, like Michael Segru, the philosophy professor, and to see how his intrinsic research and well-read focus at a very early age, patternizing himself, this information into himself, reading all the great philosophers, all the great works, himself, and then being able to talk about this many years later is a real delight on his channel. But to look at Nietzsche and to see how simple the essence of what all of these people are talking about. It gets into free will. It gets into personal power. It gets into the fact that is it perfectly fine to be liberated? Like you get into the philosophy or the sophist type view of a situation where it's like every situation presents itself where you can either choose to express this ultimate personal power of whatever I feel I do and whatever I demand and command must be done. But if you can't, if you're not coming from a place where you have established, first through intellect, these base principles of understanding of what is the most important thing. So that's what Esoteric Principles of Light did for me, and what I purposaciously, I had to go in and really think about what is the essence. And to me, what kept coming up over and over again, no matter what religion I was looking into, we're talking about the elephant in the room, what everyone kind of tries to skate around, pretend is not there, but is talking about silently in reverence, but it's kind of afraid to discuss it because none of us have it, and that is purity at the root, at the heart of every subject, of everything that's discussed, anything that can be thrown back at you, where you yourself can be refuted, comes down to the one thing, and that's the level of purity and the ability to go through this purification, and whether or not you are turning to the societal construct in doing this through actions, deeds, behavior, which none of us are able to go through this process because we're stepping out into this carnal, corporeal aspect to a world, and nothing out here is pure. But then we see, like, this gets into animism, right? Where through cultures that go way back, there's this agreed upon alliance of understanding that could get into Luciferianism, that there's this sort of ignorance with animals, but there's also a purity where, you know, they're licking their balls, or they're smelling each other's ass, or, you know, but it's all information, right? It's all going through a process. Like, it's not, in most animals, there are a few that get a little strange, but you got to wonder what the hell happened to them and what the sort of past lives are. Like, do certain spirits that were of a human origin or of an animal origin, is there a transgression? Is there, are there walls, and who is responsible for this? So that's what I found extremely interesting in the discourse that Robert Bigelow discusses, where if you're talking about people disincarnate that don't forget a thing, they're exactly who they were in life, you've got a lot of people who have personal interest and a business mind that are going on to the other side. It's also huge trafficking. And that's the most disturbing thing, is it's like the oldest business that's ever been around. We like to think that it's, you know, some people like to say, oh, it's prostitutes. You know, some people like to say, oh, it's being a thief. That's the earliest business where people can kind of like run this sort of racket on their own, and then if they get it far enough, they're connected with other people, and then they're the head of a, you know, or involved with a international crime syndicate. And then, so you have the whore, the thief, and then professional liars. You have everyone that's around in the political realm that can keep secrets, that can dialogue with people and see that other people keep secrets. There are these clandestine organizations, alma mater, if you will, where you silence and be quiet, I'll silence and be quiet, and we won't talk about it, you know, and that anybody who's taken these steps, there's a point, and that's what gets into my own personal experience, where there was this place where it was like I was literally shown, told, and had a ritual done on me where it was like, you're about to blow up. You're successful so far on your own. You're searching for more. You're now starting to do this remote viewing, metaphysical exercises in yourself. You're studying philosophy all day. You're training all day. This is going somewhere. We're calling you out. Either you join up with us, or we're going to make your life one hell of a lot harder. And there was just no way that I could join up with what I'm discussing. But I was able to then see for myself and backward engineer what is really going on. And then my mind has been blown, because I thought that I was going through a personal hell, which I was and still am, but that our personal hell is something that other people are also going through, and that they have had different life experiences, different avenues of expression or investigation that was available to them throughout their lifetime, and that with the same questions, they have been able to get a little bit further or go off in a tangent in a different area, to where little by little by little you start to see and be able to piece together the face of what we're talking about. So I find it extremely interesting what Robert Bigelow talks about, because he's put so much money into the research and still runs this research program. We're alive at a time right now where a lot of these men, a lot of these people are passing away. It's not just men, right? Like Billie J. Saley, with her discoveries in orthomolecular nutrition and sciences. God rest her soul. And other people who have made huge contributions to this, not in just the ways of science and technology. And I guess what I try to do is I'm looking at how everything ties in together. As an INTJ, I'm looking at like this, like what is the mechanism, what is the main system. And I don't even like to go toward the word control, like that this is, like ultimately control isn't something that is a problem for the system that's running the show. Like, ultimately, here on Earth, the system that we choose at the time in the era, but also the progressions or regressions that we make, display a striving of a collective mind that ultimately, whether or not we want to own up to it, we choose each time we go to Starbucks, each time we're hopping in our car, each time we're using a certain technology that not only the NSA, but or CIA or other operative programs that we don't even know about have been utilizing from a militaristic sense. But this discussion of a war. And so, what is this war that's being discussed? These guys who know all of this information, that are privy to everything that I'm discussing here, the bottom line warning, the most pertinent takeaway, key takeaway information is the subject of war, the discussion of war. Is it the same war that's talked about in the Vedas? Is it why Star Wars is something that's so out there and yet ties into, if you ever watch Joseph Campbell on his fascination with Star Wars, the great Joseph Campbell, his studies in mythology, these men who entrenched themselves in stacks of books that were very obscure, that might not even be available today. The key takeaway, the walk away of, and I'm not saying Joseph Campbell came to this conclusion, but he was alive, and Bill Moyer did some interviews with him. Really amazing stuff that he talked about, but he's talking about the mythos. How important it is to us to create a myth, an Ubermensch, an underground man, to look at the mimetic sequencing, the first part of the code, when we go into any endeavor, what that code represents. Like when you take a step in a direction, and then you take another step, and then you take another step. Most of us think we can just dip our toe in and we're all right. Most people like when you turn the light off and you feel a presence, some odd people like Aleister Crowley will keep the light off. They got to know. But it's also involved with who they've been through lifetimes. Information that's codified in their soul, in the energy. How that energy got into a body, talking about re-embodiment, a practitioner. Then there are others, like even Nathaniel Gillis talks about how he, after these experiences in his childhood, where he engaged with somebody who he thought was a real little girl when he was, and this little girl, he found that there was an apparition. There's these little trails of experiences that we have, and I'm sure most people can identify with this, where you will be under heavy scrutiny or attack at certain times, certain days, no matter where you go. Even if you're able to evade it and say, I'm going to have a good day today, I'm not going to let this negative energy have control over my life. And it's very assaultive because it instantly snuffs any idea that we have free will. Because in a millisecond, somebody can say something to you that really makes you believe, holy shit, I'm going to lose my car today, or I'm going to be kicked out on my ass on the street, or I'm losing my job, what the hell? And we're brought back down to this level where we're no longer in a state of mind where we're thriving. And once that's taken from you, that metaphysical energy of thrive, of growth, the things that I'm talking about, the most important things, is about your soul and discovery, right? And to figure out what is that next step, what is free will. And the fact that it becomes undeniable no matter what channel you adhere to, even if you're on the more shallow end, on the more superficial scale, you will not be able to watch Mr. Beast videos soon without going into an area of very complex endeavor, where you see that no, there is no simple channel where people just try to entertain you. They stay off the intellectual stuff. We have a job, and that is completion. That was the area that I was very focused on and did a lot of study in a very short period of time to come up with the main principles and esoteric principles of light. But that it becomes undeniable with how we use force, that you can sit and stew in your own principles that are founded in purity and purification, and see the process, not only backward engineering to see how anti-principles were used on you, but to see how principles must be manifest. I call it blank slate infusion in EPL. But more so that there is undeniably a war that is going on between this sort of left-right paradigm. And it's important to see that the reason that it's called the left and right, or the right-left paradigm, is the fact that no matter where you are spinning in space, in your awareness, having these appendages, you are always aware of a right-left. Okay, so as you're spinning around, that right and left can become up and down. You have your planes of motion. It can become the transverse. But you're always working at an angle. And I used to like to look at this and discuss it, and then I found out that it was like, it was kind of a forgery on the postulated antiquities market. We're talking about Emerald Tablet Thoth. So I'll take key pieces of information and walk away with it, much like Zarathustra, thus spoke Zarathustra, or the Zoroaster in Zoroastrianism. That was a person who walked, at least from the story of mythology or folklore, walked completely pure. And that he was considered the Persian forerunner to the Messiah. Some people like to say that that's Jesus Christ, but then when we really get into how can we identify an actual figure through the discourse of factual information that the Jews kept meticulous record. How could somebody be alive, a Galilean, be alive at a certain time and this not be documented? And conclusively it was, and that there was a King Isa. And you could just take that and go, that's enough. But then you see the teachings of the Essenes and you look at the fact that, wow, this is remarkably very similar to why Nietzsche saw it as a great importance to focus in and put the boom light on the Zoroaster and to say, this is, 3,500 years ago or whatnot, this is when something happened. And then you start to look at the 12, 13,000 year half cycle back to the, postulation of the Younger Dryas. And you see like this 3,000 to 4,000 years, 3,000 to 4,000, just these quarter cycles, these eighth cycles, harmonics, hertz, principles, codified color networks, what we can and we cannot see, what we can interact with, what we can't interact with in the infrared. Really interesting stuff when it gets into Steve Mira and Barry Fitzgerald. And thank you to Nathaniel Gillis. I looked into that some weeks ago after him really, showing his reverence toward those gentlemen and their research. And it's really cool what they came up with. And they're still doing it. And they worked professionally and did many professional jobs, particularly when I've watched like Steve Mira, where he's gone in and factored through things where he kind of takes the postulation that we're going to find out a very rational meaning to why these people think that this is some sort of haunting or apparitional, something going on here that's unexplainable in the sort of tangible aspect of phenomenology, And so this just brought greater and greater questions to him. And again, it becomes this area where you could say, from a personal sense of the only information that we have, it's like a war for your soul. And so it gets riveting because that's exactly what I went through. But if it's just a war for your soul, then why can somebody go through this transitional stage of being and becoming and not necessarily die, right? So to me, it's more a war where you have to choose which side you're going to be on. And in the expression of the things that we do, the actionable deeds that we go through, that there is no middle ground. That when you get into the studies of Jesus on the cross, you're looking at somebody who's not leaning toward the left or the right. It's somebody who is balanced in the center. To me, the subjectivity of studying that type of thing And just the mere postulation of what would a pure man go through, what would somebody who really has this pure power, like the Son of God, right? The person who expresses purity, what would this person, what would it look like in a real world environment? Like not looking back a couple thousand years ago and feeling separated from that, but to say, what if this happened now, today? Because what we start to see is, well, the physics, the physical construct of the things that occur, things that happen around us, they're not any different today than they were yesterday. Even this sort of postulation that the people thought differently, they wrote differently. And then we find these articles, like when I was looking into the Hammadi, the Gnostic archives, and I was able to read the Gospel of Truth. I'm looking at it going, this not only sounds a lot like the things that I'm writing almost in this sense of prose on esoteric principles of light, and the things that I'm thinking about, but it seems like it was written yesterday, you know? So there's these sort of bourgeois, fancy notions that are seen through every era in society, fads, if you will, and that is like the Enlightenment era, you know, the Rococo, terrible artwork, you know, Deco style, you know, Victorian craftsmanship, things like this. You start to see how these specific eras sort of are faddish or imprinted in a time, but how those things are expressed through the culmination of not only a matriculation of a certain type of thought, but that they follow a certain pecking order that makes complete and total rational sense, even if you're looking at it through ontological means, more from a place of religiosity, personal belief systems, and then how those things that seem almost metaphysical are also expressed and seen in university, right? So the war seems to be based on, once you have made this choice, once you realize that I must follow purity, I must be pure, and in that, the things that I did that were impure were against myself, I transgressed against myself, and now that I know who I am, I must take these appropriate steps. And then you start to see how the steps you're taking, others are also taking. But in that, you have this dichotomy, at least we'll look at that as a duality at first. It just helps the delineation of complexity to be reduced, to be able to begin to think that way. Because there are other factions involved, obviously, when you're looking at dimensions, when you're looking at any sort of construct. We don't just start out with a dodecahedron and go, okay, these are all the constructs in life. I suppose some people start out with that, but then it gets back into this sort of concept of rebirth. Even people who are being instructed and taught from a certain level, where a lot of these people, it's just dismissed how much they were being mentored and taught even in life. Even as they went to sleep, people would discuss how, no, I talk, these people come to me and they talk to me, and then all anyone's really interested in is the end product. It's like, oh, you came out with this specific product that, you know, serves the greater good, the greater humanitarian effort, and that's good enough for me. And the key takeaway was where the information came from in the first place, right? And so, and why the information came forth, from the light bulb to the battery and on. And when we look at those things, we start to see that there's an undeniable metaphysical aspect, a war, if you will, between this dichotomy of two sides. that probably leads into something more, but we start out with that. So then you have the world of anti-principle. You have the world that is solidified in not only what we would just consider rationalism, determinism, utilitarianism, Marxism. Like, we start to see how the construct, the fabric, even down to our trabecular bone and our Venus systems and the number system has to be based on certain geometrical constants, or the thing just doesn't live. It doesn't thrive. Our bodies, this building, the buildings that you see around you, the highway systems, you get one little thing wrong in the mix or with the mathematics, and there's either going to be, again, two things. You're going to have like this corrective aspect where there's flux in how, that's the really cool thing about graphene and a lot of these other materials that are being used, but it's scary also because you're talking about an intelligence where there is, not particularly in graphene, but how graphene can be used with nano or nanoid type robotic systems, possibly coming from a central source, but how there's a self-correcting that has to take place, and we have to look at ourselves and be honest with how much self-correction are we capable of, right? We either have the hardware or we don't. And for a lot of us, we're not even able to go into the discourse and the matriculation of study unless we give something up in ourselves. We're talking about a more spiritualistic or metaphysical approach to things, and that we have to study a certain area that we know, such as, the modern day mathematics. We have to go into this arbitrary thinking that is so far against ourselves. You have the right left brain paradigm occurring there as well. And that when you have to go to the height of not choosing one, you start to see how certain things emerge, such as schizophrenia or a duality in deviant behavior. Where could you blame the person when you go back and you look at their lives? Could you blame that person for having such a personality separational split where they're expected to do this, they're put through this program, they're trying to be true to themselves, they're never able to think for a second because there's so much noise going on through the rearing process through their childhood, and then they're spit out into the world, and this is what they ultimately end up doing or what they become. I find philosophy to be ever more important in the development of philosophical concepts and ideas, but this leads us back to what we've been talking about the entire time, was that you have to make a choice. There is a clear choice put before you that you're either going to choose the right or the left. And when you start to take these steps, you're either going to say yes or no to environmental situations. We can stay quiet for a time, but at a certain point, so right now what's happening is, for the first time in a very long time, you're starting to see this gravitation and this culmination with many people where there's a movement toward purity. That we look at the fact that money really doesn't fulfill me. You start to see people who are very young that are multimillionaires, billionaires, if you will. They didn't necessarily do anything that was genius or complex. They just sort of followed along with it they weren't searching for this sort of metaphysical truth, but ultimately it leaves anyone scratching their head where they're kind of going, I can buy anything I want, I can do anything I want, I can have anything I want. But then it gets into that dialogue between Socrates and Gorgias, where you have, are you really free when you have liberation? When you think you can do anything, have anything, and now you're still living under the same detrimental construct that everyone else is, whether or not you are waking up under a bridge or in this fancy house. Once you think that you can go, have, lascivious relationships, once licentious relationships with people, once you think that you can screw somebody over and that they're worthless, once you're rude to a certain number of people, you start to see how the energy is working against you, and you start to lose things. Any given Sunday, Al Pacino, right? Obviously, it's way more complex than that. And then you kind of start to see how you're working with this energy, no matter where you are in a social class in society, populism, if you will. And you see how it's not really about stuff and things, but it gets into relationships. But those relationships that you're building are with people, talking about like the builders, the Masonic traditions, and how when you're aligning with those specific people, there is something more that appeals to something in you, something that you thought was intrinsic, private, something that you only knew, that was only prevalent, alive within the being of who you are, your SOLE, your soul enterprise of these are my internal thoughts. This is my internal feeling. This is my internal self. No one knows, no one cares. But the fact of the matter is that you are in succession to be in alignment with a certain order, right? So this gets into that whole thing of order or chaos, right? Of where the entropy is being produced. You could say chaos if you really want to go there. And it's happening all around you, the vibration. But how you vibrate and the vibrational quality around you is what you serve and who you are ultimately. All the players, like Shakespeare, all the people on the stage, all the pathos, rhetoric, and sway and play, the logos, everything that you see out there becomes an expression of a one mind principle. And that there is a dichotomy between the two sides that is being discussed all the time. It's being researched all the time. When you finally see it, you can no longer stay in an area of compartmentalization where you're limiting yourself because you need to get paid. Because what you will find ultimately is that you are stuck under the roof with certain people in a certain idea within a certain construct, and now you are in prison. And the truth of why you endeavored to do anything was to gain freedom. Now, what does freedom mean to you? So that dialectical exchange between Gorgias and Socrates was extremely profound. And so I ask you the question, like ultimately out of this long derivative of information here that has led to the succession of the ultimate question is, who are you? What do you define as freedom? Because if you're asking yourself about what is free will, is there free will? Does it exist? And then you come to the conclusion one day, no, free will doesn't exist. And then you go on with that, and now you're going, well, if I don't exercise free will, all I am is a robot. Well, I'm able to think, I'm able to walk, and it's like, oh, that's a trick. They just want you to think that you can do that. You're basically like that lure up there, that noose is always waiting, and you're gonna hang yourself. And it's like, but if the soul goes on, what's the point of that? Why am I still alive? If I've come to this information, doesn't that make me dangerous? And it's kind of like, it's because you, within the physics of this, the construct of this world, can only ultimately refute other concepts, ideas that you don't agree with, and ultimately come to that point of the cross, if you will, where you are in balance. You must be in balance, and you must be in alliance with the truth of yourself, your pure expression. And I think that when we do that, I'm not going to say that you remember everything, and that the amnesia that we're born into in this world, you're suddenly going to have this profound experience of memory, remember who you are. I've heard some people say that. But that you are choosing a side. And that out of the postulation that, okay, let's just start out with two sides. Let's not get into all the variables of alliance, but that it becomes undeniable that we look at these gray areas of people who aren't necessarily completely rationalistic in their view, or, looking at things through like a cosmicism, nihilism, determinism, and ultimate alliance with, okay, this is who's feeding me, this is how I stay alive, I'll be a stormtrooper. To the point where you look at, I must be free, I must be pure, I must follow a more pietous view. I mean, I'm using the term piety, Thomas Aquinas, David Hume sense, where it is a form of liberation. Like, I know that people who think that liberty and being able to do whatever you want is the ultimate conclusion, and then they feel like they're gods, they feel like they're the ultimate power in their lives, and how many people fall into that trap. But that to the right-hand path, and that's why it is considered the right-hand path, and those who are adept initiates, however you want to term it, they see the purification and the pure process as being the only way, and that was even the way was what the religion that Jesus, King Isis followed. Again, you can look that Ralph Ellis up, especially if you go back earlier in this live stream, and look at some of the correlations of the tapestry that I tried to lay out here. And typically, if I wasn't so scattered and I didn't have so much crap going on in my personal life, and that ties directly into what I'm talking about, I would get way more specific, and I would be able to study a specific area of interest that I'm talking about, and be able to dialogue on how that ties in to this. I'm not going to say ultimate conclusion, because there are steps beyond this. I wouldn't even call them steps. I would say that once you are actually in the place where you know the decision that your soul has made, you've taken those steps, you've gone either full left-hand path, full right-hand path, Or maybe there's a place somewhere in between, right? Where you're not stuck in between, where you have this quickening that occurs, and maybe that's what this is all about, is to get away from this war, to get away from the struggle, this dukkha, this dharma, this karma, this maya, and to see that peace isn't ultimately what we must choose, that will only allow more complacency, and will just pause this war of ways, this war of the minds, for a brief period of time, but that people must begin to think more optimistically, almost, Pangloss, over optimistically, to the point where they become so immersed and entrenched with the concept of their truth, of what they really believe in, that ultimately they become practitioners of the undeniable, unavoidable mechanism that they see as a total expression of who they are, and what they serve. And so for me, I follow at current time the right hand path. I'm not saying that I would follow the left hand path. What I am saying is that I believe that once you're in alliance with a particular modality, and it's almost like you're throwing this magical fluid on these steps, and the golden steps just start to show themselves, the yellow brick road, if you will. And the way becomes clear. We won't get into that, Wizard of Oz and all that, but yeah, isn't that interesting, right? Because you start to go through this pathos, rhetoric, and play. Even, I have this idea, I'm going to make this movie, it's going to be epic, we're going to do all this, and then you see the craziness of, I've looked into it, and I'm sure you have too, of the little people in the hotel that were mostly unemployed at the time, and they were causing such a ruckus. You have the truth, the reality, or what happened to Dorothy, Liza Minnelli's mommy. You see how these stories tie directly in to things that are like Arthurian or Arthurian legend that Ralph Ellis looks into, Joseph Campbell, and how you can't go through displaying a story without that story tying directly into this right-hand path, left-hand path paradigm. That, okay, what's the story? You can't, in other words, free will doesn't allow you to make something up. And that's how I think kids are both set up, but they're also taught, to where they think, okay, imagination, paramnesia, it's just kids playing, it's just kids imagining, and it's like, no, those are souls that are now in bodies, and they have the liberty, they're given liberation, not all kids either, remember that, many aren't, to go through the process of self-discovery, but it is only for them to forget, in a sense, but be reminded of the alliance that they've had as a soul force prior to their birth in this life here now. And that ultimately, you're not only given a choice, but you might be given more than one lifetime. If you're uncertain, if there's uncertainty about which side you're on, if you're teetering on that side, And so you see how there are certain people who have decided to neither choose the right or the left, to franchise off of other people, to create a business out of this, and are of a certain mind and a certain lineage where they're going to hold the gates closed for other people. And so I believe that that is what is happening right now. I believe that that is the big the big point of contention, of protection, that there are these gatekeepers that are appointed not only through lineage and through personal expression of who they are and what they choose, but that you look into the matrix, you see the blue pill. It's like there are certain people that would, believe it or not, no matter how many atrocities they've seen, no matter what the exposure that they've been through, they will always choose the blue pill. They will always choose that steak, no matter if that steak is synthetic, where it comes from, how many people have to be sacrificed, Cannibal's Kitchen, adrenochrome, all that crazy stuff that is very real, you know. So I'm going to end this because I really did get to a point where I feel like I was able to really express what I had to convey, and that I would like to pick up where I left off. And one area that I left off in the last live that I did on Stellar Mass 13, not quite 2 weeks ago, but right around that, about a week and a half ago, was I was discussing the EPL principles, the Esoteric Principles of Light principles. And I was looking at the macro principles, which starts with purity, goes into sacrifice, expression, wisdom, community, production, ego, and then the pure truth. And I found, after much rumination, study, discovery, and illumination some 10 years ago, that these were the constructs and the best words, the best descriptors that would go with certain color sequence, a Hertz combination code with our emotion, energy and motion, that would tie into the human endeavor, particularly if you're looking at the right-hand path or the left-hand path, because you can see these, the contrary, the anti-principle of these principle constructs and how they're displayed. Where there's the first step is always that people will refute you. They will show that you are impure because they are impure in themselves. And so by discourse of attribution, they will then begin to go through the process, and you'll watch them do this, where they'll sacrifice you. They will sacrifice other people, in other words. They will mute your expression. They will attempt to. This gets into the malignant narcissist and the entities that seem to be within and around these particular narcissistic, we call them entities, I don't know. And then that there is a covert liberty-based expression in physical wisdom, where they will do what they want sexually. They'll often have a dualistic life. They'll have other things that they do. And you really need to look at yourself and call BS on yourself and realize, do I have a dualistic life, or is this something that is being done to me by other forces, by other entities? So then we get into community and how there's a whole clandestine community that is it's an operation, but there are operatives in this community that are out to serve the anti-principle, and it blows some people away when they start to see that, when they start to see what's really going on in government, when they see what's going on even in their own families, how people are almost displaying themselves more like avatars that are being controlled by entities. It's very scary. And then it gets into production, like what is this producing? Even planned obsolescence, making things that don't work, that has a specific discourse in projection of a specific modality of ultimate control, as to not only force people to choose a side, but to also gain control through financial markets, through the sociological means, through political means, to already make it so that people feel like they can't do anything, can't move, and can only go a certain way. You're looking like at a chessboard, and from a right hand path perspective, the chessboard doesn't even exist. Like, I'm going up, I'm going around, I'm going down, I'm fluid, I'm autonomous, but with that autonomy, there's an alliance with other people who believe in purity. And then ultimately, that's an expression of ego. So the egoic self has to be in alignment with an ego expression of the totality of what you serve, and that you do serve a particular side. So there are obviously more intricate things happening here, and this is what gets into what I refer to as sub-principles, where you then have the motivating factors, which are faith, love, hope, mercy, compassion, passion, trust, and then you get into temperance, care, duty, honor, union, grace. That should be all 13, and how those sub-principles serve the master principles of purity, sacrifice, expression, wisdom, community, production, ego. And that when you look at these and you look at the construct, we are trying to understand how we can become closer toward the monad, which was referred to as, like, that's the origin of God and the God source, the God force. But then you also see how there is an anti-principle dichotomy, if you will, when you get into the areas of sub-principles, where you're not to have faith, to be faithful is stupidity to them. It is blind. We're all faced with this. Like, even when people think they're the baller and they have, all their degrees and they're driving down the road sucking their cheeks, and it's like, ultimately you will serve something. And this is ultimately what you serve, and you will be used through the discourse of this information so that others can and inevitably have to make their choice as well. My choice is the right-hand path. And under that right-hand path, I have to be scrutinized and judged. And so then it becomes a part of the great work, like, what did you get done in your lifetime? And it's like, I will to be able to bring this information forth. That's why this video that's about to end was extremely important to me, to be able to express that, show a little bit of the information, to be in movement while I'm doing it, to call out and commandments, and to say, I command you, left-hand path, to be destroyed, to be disseminated, to be discovered. I command you, left-hand path, to be in the ruins, to stop sacrificing the pure and innocent of the right-hand path. I command you, evil spirits. I command you, evil people that are avatars for those spirits, to be abolished, to die away, to no longer be able to have any sort, I command you to not have any sort of prominence or political power or any other type of power in this world or any other. I command you. I command you to leave. I command you to die away and to stop feeding off of pure source energy and those of the right hand path. And so those things become extremely important, and to say, let it be, you know? So we're always being misguided in a sense, where we're given certain mantras, you know, we're given certain commands to our religiosity, when we can't just speak freely with our own colloquial etymology, nomenclature, to say this is coming from my spiritual source, my spiritual center, from my true self, my pure self, and I am saying this, you know, in with everything I have, and all the profoundness of what I believe in and what I hold to be true. So those types of things are extremely important for you to do if you are to have a way through, right? So you start to see how they want to destroy your faith. They want to make you look at love as lust. Like, no, ultimately you just want something. Ultimately you just want power. And it's like, I only want the power. I only want to take the power because I want to be able to reinstate in any way that I possibly can the purification and the purity in this world, in myself, and in everywhere. And I want to abolish, a command that the left-hand path be abolished and destroyed, and that I also have to have these positive commandments of, I command the right-hand path and all that I am in the right-hand path and that the right-hand path is and encompasses. I command you to have the power to destroy the left-hand path. Let it be. And these types of things we don't do. We don't speak them out. We aren't articulating these things. We have these feelings, we have this uneasiness, we have this sense of loss or a lack of power, but we never speak that. And that's what I just did. Is that I command the right-hand path to be above the left-hand path always and forever. Let it be. How hard is that? I command all false powers to die away. I command all left-hand path and all false powers attached, all factions that are leeching off of the right-hand path and the pure source energy and all of the innocence that is connected in any way, to be gone, to die away. Let it be. So you have faith, love, hope. They want to ruin your hope. They want to take your hope away. They want you to laugh at people who have hope and see people who are hopeful as weak, that they're not actuating. You know, I really think that this is why Friedrich Nietzsche was in this place of limbo the last 11 years of their lives and of his life. And 11 isn't that a strange one, right? Because a lot of the things that started to happen to me, and as I saw years before, I couldn't really put it together, but 2011 was a big transitional time. Not only was it, you know, purported to be like the end of the world, the end of civilization, you know, the whole Mayan calendar thing. I may be a year or so off there, but it was leading up to 2013 when some major things started happening. And this is really when I started to look at things and when I was under heavy scrutiny and attack. So you have faith, love, hope, mercy. They want you to cry out in mercy when they have no power whatsoever. They're being given the power, right, by those who don't even have power, right? And that's where these gatekeepers really come in, is the fact that there aren't any people who can't choose a right and a left-hand path. So I command all entities have to choose a right or left-hand path. I command that there will be no one in the middle, right? Let it be. Who's saying it? Who's commanding it? Who's expressing it? Who's willing it? It's not about, it's about personal power, but it's also about the power of connectivity. So it has to do with the ultimate truth of what you esteem as the highest power. And every waking moment of every moment of your life isn't abstracted from the pure source of what your life is in culmination to do, to produce, to become. And you got to see that. You got to see that this is forever. This isn't like a part-time thing. This isn't something that we're just playing with. It's not a fairy tale. It's everywhere on the television that you look. It's everywhere in media. It's everywhere in movies. It's everywhere on YouTube. If you want to have a shallow conversation, you're hiding from it. We're talking about the truth. We are talking about the subject, not skirting around it, that everything centers around right now. And if you disagree with what I'm saying, then you need to kind of look at the very highly probable fact that you are a left-hand path practitioner, and that you're going to have to align with that. You have to align with your truth in that. So you have faith, love, hope, mercy, you have compassion. Compassion to the right-hand path and compassion to the left-hand path are completely different things. So you have faith, love, hope, mercy, compassion, passion, right? Passion is different. Like you have this blind passion for power on the left-hand path, which will always lead to ruin. Absolute power comes absolute ruin, absolute corruption. And passion for purity is something that elevates you to another level. And then trust. They laugh on the left-hand path, they laugh at trust. You put your trust in the principles, you follow the principles, you do not follow wayward people. Anyone who's in the body is already being misled by the demon. Michel Foucault, he was oddly talking about, in his philosophy, that the soul is the problem and the body is the freedom. In his statement, he's telling you he is a left-hand path practitioner, that he believes in the physical construct and the physical constants, that he believed in his amorous S&M actions. It was his interpretation of the Nietzschean will to power. And Nietzsche was quite on the fence, wasn't he? When we look back at the writing and we know where we're at in the same place that they are, that they were able to express themselves in a certain way, that they had read other men that were, philosophers and could articulate this, and many people aren't in that position where they can gain that type of education or have access to that type of data system. But right now, when you have access to YouTube, you can go look up Michael Segru and all of his educations and look into what these men were really about, because he gives a non-biased view on all of his readings and teachings. It's pretty cool how he can do that. It's quite a gift. But in that, he's at a place himself where he's really got to choose himself. Okay, after a lifetime of philosophy, are you on the right-hand path or the left-hand path? You have to choose. Isn't that a tough decision we're all under? So, faith, love, hope, mercy, compassion, passion, trust, and then duty and honor. I would say temperance and care, duty and honor. Let's say duty and honor comes in because it really teaches us about temperance and care, right? So what we have duty towards starts to emerge about halfway through, like a mimetic sequence, right? Where we've gone through the beginning stages, the beginning factors of what we're discussing as principles and the principles that we live by. So